I nearly choked on my coffee when I heard the sirens. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was the caffeine hitting too hard. But nope. The sound grew louder, tires screeched against gravel, and within seconds, my peaceful morning turned into something straight out of a bad crime drama. 3 cop cars, not 1, not 2, 3. They came skidding onto my driveway like they were raiding a drug cartel, kicking up a thick cloud of dust that swallowed half my front yard. My heart jumped for a second. Because let's be real, when that many cops show up at your house, your brain immediately goes, "What the hell did I do?" I set my mug down, wiped my hands on my pajama pants, and stepped onto the porch, fully expecting some kind of explanation. Maybe a wild animal got loose. Maybe a neighbor reported suspicious activity. Maybe I had been sleepwalking and committed a felony in my dreams. But no. The explanation arrived in the form of a woman. And not just any woman. She stormed out of one of the cop cars, her heels sinking into my gravel driveway, her expression locked somewhere between righteous fury and pure insanity. Her oversized sunglasses sat aggressively on her nose, the kind of dramatic shades people wear when they think they're above the law. In one hand, she clutched a clipboard like it was a sword. In the other, she held a stack of papers so thick they could be used as a weapon. Her lips pursed. Her nostrils flared. Her entire posture screamed power trip. I had never seen this woman before in my life. And yet she looked at me like I was her personal enemy. Then, in a voice so loud it could probably shatter glass, she pointed at my property and screamed, "This man has an illegal electric fence. He's endangering the entire community." I blinked. I had a lot of questions. Who the hell was this woman? What fence? What community? Because last time I checked, the nearest community was over 2 miles away. I stood there, still half asleep, watching as the cops, who looked just as confused as I felt, started fanning out like they were about to uncover a major crime scene. One of them actually unhooked his radio, as if he expected backup. Meanwhile, I was just standing there in pajama pants, no shoes, holding a half-drunk cup of coffee. I squinted at the woman, trying to place her. She definitely wasn't my neighbor. She wasn't a cop. And unless Amazon was sending their customer service reps door to door now, she definitely wasn't here to check on my Prime membership. Then it hit me. The oversized sunglasses, the clipboard, the permanent scowl, the unmatched level of entitlement. Oh no. Oh no. This wasn't just a regular crazy lady, this was a Karen. And not just any Karen, an HOA Karen. I sighed, rubbing my temples, already regretting my decision to step outside. This was going to be a long morning. By the time my brain fully booted up, Karen was already in full meltdown mode. She was pacing up and down my driveway like a prosecutor in a courtroom, ranting about safety hazards, legal violations, and the sanctity of the neighborhood. I should clarify, this was not her neighborhood. I don't live in an HOA. I live on a 10-acre plot of land, surrounded by open fields and trees. My closest neighbor is half a mile away. I could build a 50-foot statue of Bigfoot in my front yard, and no one would have the legal right to complain. But that didn't matter to Karen. She was waving her clipboard like it was a royal decree, rattling off nonsense about endangering the community and bringing down property values. The cops, bless their souls, were trying their best to keep up. One of them, an older officer with a mustache that screamed, "I don't get paid enough for this," finally cleared his throat and turned to me. "Sir, we got a call about an illegal hazard on your property." I took a sip of my coffee. "You mean my fence?" The officer glanced at Karen, then back at me. Yeah. I gestured lazily toward the fence in question. "It's legal. I have all the permits. Want to see?" Before the officer could answer, Karen let out an outraged gasp. "He's lying!" she screeched, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "That fence is a death trap. I have photographic evidence." One of the younger officers actually raised an eyebrow. Photographic evidence? Of what? Karen huffed like it was the dumbest question she had ever heard. Of the fence, of the dangers it poses. What if children wander onto his land? What if someone's pet gets electrocuted? What if… The officer sighed. "Ma'am, do you live here?" Karen crossed her arms. "I live in the HOA, the real community, the one that actually cares about safety." The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. "And how far away is that?" Karen hesitated for just a second. 2 miles. The officer stared at her. "So, not in this neighborhood?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "It's near the neighborhood," she snapped, "and that fence affects all of us. It's ugly, it's dangerous, and it is completely unacceptable." I rubbed my temples. "Ma'am, my fence is legal. It's a standard livestock electric fence. It's meant to keep coyotes and stray dogs away. That's it. It's not a security fence. It's not some high-voltage zapper. It's literally just a deterrent." Karen gasped like I had just confessed to burning down an orphanage. "Oh my God, did you hear that?" she shrieked. "He just admitted it's electrified." The younger officer coughed into his fist, probably to cover a laugh. The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, do you understand how livestock fences work?" Karen turned red. "I don't need to understand anything. That fence is a crime against the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "Again. Not your neighborhood." Karen clenched her fists like she was about to explode. And then, as if the universe had a sense of humor, my neighbor's goat Lightning trotted up to the fence. Now, Lightning wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Before anyone could react, he stuck his nose right to the wire. "Busy DT!" Lightning jumped back in surprise, not in pain, not in distress, just pure, dumb shock. Then he flicked his tail and wandered off like nothing even happened. "Karen?" Karen screamed like she had just witnessed a live execution. Karen clutched her chest like she was about to faint. "Did you see that?" she shrieked, turning to the officers like she expected them to pull out their handcuffs right then and there. "An innocent animal was just electrocuted. He could have died." The younger officer, still barely holding back his laughter, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, it's a livestock fence. It's designed to keep animals safe from predators. That goat just learned not to touch it." Karen was having none of it. "I don't care. This is animal cruelty. This mad scientist is running an illegal death trap right next to our community." I sighed and rubbed my temples. "Okay, first of all, Karen, don't call me Karen." "Fine, Mom. First of all, my fence is completely legal. I have the permits. I have the right to put it up. And most importantly, I don't even live near you." She jabbed a finger at me. "That doesn't matter. Just the sight of this monstrosity is ruining our property values." I blinked. "Your HOA is 2 miles away. How can you even see my fence?" Karen opened her mouth, then hesitated. "Well, people know it's here," she snapped, trying to recover. "And that's bad enough." The older officer sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that says, "I'm too old for this." He turned to me. "Sir, if you have the permits, we have no issue here." Karen gasped like he had just committed treason. "What? You're not going to do anything?" The officer shrugged. "He's within his rights." Karen's hands curled into fists. Her face turned bright red, like a cartoon character about to blow steam from their ears. Then she stomped toward her car. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You'll be hearing from the HOA." I laughed. "I don't belong to your HOA." She froze for a second, like the thought had never even occurred to her. Then she spun around, got in her car, and sped off, kicking up more dust than the police cars had. I exhaled. Well, that was insane. The younger officer chuckled. Welcome to HOA complaints. The older officer just shook his head. Good luck, man. And with that, they left. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I went to check my mail and nearly burst out laughing. My mailbox was stuffed to the brim with papers. At first, I thought it was just junk mail, some ridiculous spam offers, maybe some random coupons. Nope. I pulled out the stack and saw the dreaded letters at the top. HOAVIOLATIONNOTICE. Now, let me remind you, I do not belong to an HOA. My property is fully independent. I have never paid an HOA fee in my life. And yet, Karen and her little dictatorship club had sent me official-looking documents threatening me with fines for having an unauthorized electric fence, demands to remove it or face legal action, warnings about being out of compliance with neighborhood aesthetics. And the best one? A threat to put a lien on my house if I didn't comply. I actually had to sit down and laugh. These people had zero authority over my land. They might as well have been writing me fines in Monopoly money. I went inside, tossed the paperwork onto the counter, and considered my options. I could ignore it. I could call a lawyer. Or I could have some fun with it. Because if Karen thought she could scare me with fake legal threats, she was about to learn just how petty I could be. Later that day, I decided to pay a visit to my neighbor, Old Man Harris. Now, if you want to know anything about the local gossip, you go to Harris. The man has been living here for 50 years, and he knows everything about everyone. I found him sitting on his porch, beer in one hand, watching his goat Lightning chew on an old boot. You won't believe this, I said, dropping the stack of HOA nonsense onto the table beside him. He squinted at the papers, took a long sip of beer, and then burst into wheezing laughter. Oh, they really don't know when to quit, do they? He chuckled. They're sending me fines from an HOA I don't even belong to, I said, shaking my head. Is that even legal? Harris snorted. Hell no. I raised an eyebrow. So, Karen's done this before? Harris leaned back in his chair, grinning. Son, Karen's been running that HOA like a damn dictatorship for the last 10 years. She tried to fine a guy for having the wrong shade of blue on his front door. Tried to sue a family because their kids' sidewalk chalk drawings were decreasing property values. I whistled, and nobody stopped her. Oh, plenty of folks tried, Harris said. But Karen thrives on conflict. The second someone pushes back, she goes nuclear. I sighed. Well, I'm not in her HOA, so she can throw a tantrum all she wants. I don't have to listen. Harris chuckled. You say that now, but she ain't done with you yet. I should have known he was right, because just a few days later, the next phase of Karen's insanity began. It started with phone calls. Random people, complete strangers, started calling my house. Is it true your fence electrocuted a dog? I heard you were running an illegal power grid. Won't someone think of the children? Confused, I did some digging, and that's when I discovered it. Karen had started a Facebook smear campaign. She had posted a heavily edited, completely fake video in the HOA's private Facebook group, making it look like my fence was some high-voltage death trap. She even threw in stock footage of an electrocuted squirrel. Where did she get it? No idea. Probably pulled straight from Google. And the comments? This is disgusting. We need to petition the county to shut him down. Someone call Peter. I almost had to admire her dedication. Almost. But now, it was time to play dirty, because if Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. A few nights later, around 11 p.m., I was winding down for the night when my phone buzzed. Motion detected near fence line. I frowned. That was weird. The fence wasn't near the road, and I didn't have any animals wandering around at this hour. I opened the security app, clicked on the live feed, and nearly dropped my phone. There she was, Karen, dressed in all black, crouched near my fence like she was in some kind of low-budget spy movie. And beside her, a dog crate. I leaned in closer, trying to process what I was seeing. Was she seriously trying to release an animal onto my property? I kept watching, fascinated, as she fumbled with the latch. She kept glancing around, looking paranoid, her movements jerky and frantic. This woman, who had spent weeks screaming about safety and lawfulness, was now trespassing on private property in the dead of night. I had no idea what kind of animal was in that crate, but I was willing to bet she was trying to frame me for harming it, probably planning to record the whole thing, edit in some tragic music, and post another exposé in her HOA Facebook group. Unfortunately for her, Karen was about to meet her worst enemy, physics. As she reached down to unlatch the crate, she tripped over a rock. It wasn't even a big rock, just a small, harmless chunk of nature that her expensive shoes apparently couldn't handle. She stumbled forward, arms flailing, papers from her clipboard of doom flying everywhere. Then, in the most poetic moment of my entire life, she backed straight into the fence. Bzzzt! It wasn't a powerful shock, just a small zap, barely enough to startle a goat. But Karen reacted like she had been hit by a bolt of lightning straight from Zeus himself. She let out a blood-curdling scream, flailed wildly, and fell straight onto her back. For a moment she just lay there, completely stunned. Then she scrambled to her feet, grabbed her clipboard and crate, and bolted toward her car. She was so panicked that she forgot to close the crate door behind her, leaving it swinging in the wind. I checked the camera feed again, zooming in on the crate, and nearly burst out laughing. It was empty. She had brought an empty crate. This absolute lunatic had been pretending to release an animal just for the drama. I saved the footage immediately. By morning I had sent copies to my lawyer, the county sheriff's office, and, just for fun, posted a small, carefully edited clip online. Nothing too aggressive, just a simple caption. When your neighbor tries to frame you but gets a taste of her own medicine instead. I hit post and went about my day. By noon, the internet had exploded. Comments started pouring in, "This is gold." Karen in her natural habitat. "Someone get this woman a Darwin Award." The video spread fast. People were analyzing it frame by frame like it was some kind of forensic investigation. Someone even added dramatic sound effects, a Wilhelm scream when she got zapped and Mission Impossible music in the background. Within hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views. And Karen? She was done. She tried to report the video, claiming it was harassment. The platform denied her complaint. Then she tried to defend herself in the HOA group. I was conducting a social experiment. That was her excuse. A social experiment. Like she was some kind of scientist testing the limits of human stupidity. But by then, even her own HOA members were turning against her. Wait, so you were trespassing? You said his fence was illegal, but it zapped you, which means it was working as intended? Karen, WTF are you doing sneaking onto people's property at night? It was glorious. But Karen wasn't finished yet. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed again. Motion detected near fence line. And this time, it wasn't just Karen. It was 3 people. I sat up in bed, clicked the live feed, and felt my blood pressure spike. Karen had brought reinforcements. 3 of her HOA minions were sneaking along the fence line, this time with tools. One of them had wire cutters. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were actually trying to sabotage my fence. I switched to the night vision camera, zoomed in, and watched as Karen whispered frantically to her accomplices. She kept pointing at the fence, waving her arms dramatically, like a mob boss orchestrating a heist. One of the minions crouched down and reached toward the wire. And that's when I hit the alarm button. A deafening siren blasted from my property, cutting through the silence of the night. Karen and her crew jumped a foot in the air. Then they panicked. One of them dropped the wire cutters and took off running. Another tripped over their own feet, scrambled up, and sprinted toward the road like their life depended on it. And Karen? She screamed and booked it to her SUV. I watched as they all piled into the car and peeled off down the road, tires screeching. I exhaled and shook my head. This woman was insane. By morning, I had sent the footage to the sheriff's department. And this time, they weren't just shaking their heads. They were taking action. A few hours later, Karen got a very special visit from law enforcement. She wasn't laughing anymore. She tried to deny everything, but when the officers pulled up the security footage, her excuses fell apart fast. Trespassing, attempted vandalism, conspiracy to commit property damage. The sheriff asked if I wanted to press charges. For a long moment, I considered it. Then I shook my head. Nah, I just want my fence left alone. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered, "This isn't over." I smirked. "It is for you." And for the first time in her life, Karen was silent. A few days passed, and I was finally starting to think the storm had blown over. Karen had been embarrassed. The HOA minions had scattered, and the sheriff had made it clear that if she or anyone else so much as breathed on my property again, they'd be facing real charges. I thought that was enough to make her stop. I underestimated how deep Karen's obsession ran, because instead of just cutting her losses and crawling back into whatever HOA cave she came from, she decided to take her insanity to a whole new level. A lawsuit. That's right. Karen had officially filed a small claims lawsuit against me. Now, I didn't find out in a normal way, like a letter from a lawyer or a formal notification from the court. Karen, being the absolute lunatic that she was, personally taped the lawsuit papers to my front door. I walked outside that morning, expecting a peaceful start to my day, and instead found a single piece of printer paper taped right in the center of my door like a ransom note. I pulled it off, skimmed the nonsense, and had to physically sit down because I was laughing too hard. She was suing me for emotional distress caused by an unsafe environment, public endangerment, intentional property value sabotage, and my personal favorite, the unlawful operation of an electric hazard in a residential area, which was not only completely fake, but also the most dramatic phrase I'd ever seen in a legal document. She had even underlined it. At the bottom, she signed it herself, in fancy cursive, as if she were some high-powered attorney instead of a woman who had just run a failed nighttime sabotage mission against a livestock fence. I stood there, shaking my head, debating whether or not to frame this and hang it on my wall. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. The second I told him about it, he actually started laughing. She filed a lawsuit in small claims court? Yep. She's trying to claim emotional distress over your legal fence? Yep. There was a pause. Then, with a tone of absolute glee, he said, "Oh, we're going to tear this apart in 5 minutes." And that's exactly what we did. The court date arrived, and I walked into the courtroom to find Karen sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking smug as hell. She had gone all out. She wore a stiff blazer, had a massive stack of papers in front of her, and kept shaking her head dramatically, like this whole ordeal had personally ruined her life. She didn't have a lawyer. She was representing herself. I sat down, my lawyer beside me, and waited for the circus to begin. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she stood up and immediately launched into the most dramatic speech I have ever heard in my life. She talked about how my fence had shattered the harmony of the community, how she had been unable to sleep at night, haunted by the dangers that lurked just beyond her neighborhood, how she lived in constant fear that a child might wander into my 10-acre property and be electrocuted on sight. At one point, she even pretended to get emotional. She clutched her chest, let out a shaky sigh, and whispered, I just want to feel safe again." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she had seen some things, just stared at Karen like she was a personal insult to her time. When Karen finally finished, the judge turned to my lawyer and said, "Do you have a response?" My lawyer, he didn't even stand up. He just slid a folder across the table and said, "Everything you need is in here, Your Honor, including security footage of the plaintiff trespassing on my client's property in the middle of the night and attempting to tamper with his legally installed fence." Karen's face drained of all color. The judge picked up the folder, flipped through the pages, then sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Ma'am," she said, already exasperated, "do you have any actual evidence that this fence has harmed you?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I have received numerous complaints from concerned citizens. Do you have documentation proving you have the legal authority to enforce rules on the defendant's property? Karen's eye twitched. Well, no, but... The judge sighed, looking so done. "Ma'am, this is not a real case. Your complaint is dismissed." Boom. The gavel hit the desk, and just like that, it was over. Karen sat there, completely stunned, like she had just been personally betrayed by the American legal system. I stood up, stretched, and started heading toward the exit, but before I could even get out the door, Karen came storming after me. She stomped right up to me, her face red with rage, and hissed, "You think this is funny, don't you?" I sighed. "Karen, go home." Her hands clenched into fists. "This isn't over. I will not let you destroy everything we've built." I gave her a deadpan look. "Ma'am, I am not in your HOA. I have never been in your HOA. I do not care about your HOA. The only thing I care about is my fence, which is still legal and still standing." Karen let out a sound that can only be described as a furious dying tea kettle. Then she stomped off, heels clacking aggressively, muttering about how she was going to take this to the county and speak with the mayor. I figured she was just blowing smoke. But I underestimated one last time. Because that night, my security cameras caught one final act of HOA Karen madness. A group of her little HOA minions, probably the last ones still loyal to her, snuck onto my property and spray-painted the words HOA rules across the side of my barn. That was it. That was the last straw. I called the cops, sent them the footage, and by the next morning, Karen was getting a very different kind of visit from law enforcement. This time, she wasn't just facing a slap on the wrist. They found the paint cans in her car. They found a handwritten list of other properties she planned to vandalize. She was arrested for trespassing and property damage. And the best part, the HOA, her own precious kingdom, voted her out. It was a full-on mutiny. The same people who had cowered under her rule for years suddenly found the courage to get rid of her completely. And Karen. She put her house on the market and left town within a week. The day she drove away, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as her SUV disappeared down the road. Old Man Harris walked up beside me, nodding in approval. "Reckon that's the last we'll hear of her." "Let's hope," I said. Lightning the goat wandered over, eyeing the fence like he was thinking about testing it again. I chuckled and patted his head. "Not today, buddy." The fence, still standing, still legal, and most importantly, still none of Karen's damn business.